right, thanks, Ndile. Thanks, colleagues. Pleasure to be here with you. So yeah, this is a reflection on a teaching intervention that responded to the call for transformation, not just in what we teach, but in how we teach, how students experience learning, and whose perspectives are recognized in the process. So this presentation is also informed by ongoing research into socially just and decolonial approaches to computing education, including some of my recent work on post-colonial 4R curriculum transformation in IS education and related social justice work in the popular media. So colleagues, we are living in a time when digital technologies, especially social media, algorithms, and AI systems are not just shaping experiences, but also actively shaping society, from election interference and climate misinformation to deepening inequality, surveillance and bias. These tools often amplify existing injustices. And that's precisely why empathy in design matters, because if we don't intentionally embed care, ethics, and social awareness into how we design systems, we risk reproducing or even accelerating harm. So empathy is not just about being nice, it's also about acknowledging complexity, centering affected and marginalized communities, and resisting the myth this notion that technology is neutral. Okay, so let me start with a brief context. As you know, computing education is becoming ever more globally relevant, and at the same time, it's also becoming more diverse culturally, gender, socioeconomically, and in terms of prior academic exposure and so on. This diversity is a strength, but it also poses new pedagogical challenges, especially in applied subjects like user experience design thinking. So traditionally, we've tend to rely on standardized teaching and evaluation methods, but these often assume that students learn in the same way at the same pace and from the same point of departure. As you well know, students don't. So this study emerges from a final year undergraduate systems and analysis design course, a course that typically draws students from IT, information systems, computer science, software engineering, business, and even digital arts. So traditionally, courses like these focus on efficiency, structured modeling techniques, and technical output. So using tools like context diagrams, class diagrams, entity relationship models, these are useful tools, but they tend to be technocentric. They rarely invite students to consider the lived experiences of system users, or the social and ethical impact of the systems they build. So on the slide, you'll see a set of traditional systems and analysis and design artifacts, things in the information systems or computer science traditions. We talk about use case diagrams, sequence diagrams, class diagrams, data flow models. Now, these are useful for structuring system logic, roles, and relationships. They also define how a system should work, what data flows where, and who interacts with what. But here's the critical issue. These tools often reflect a corporate, a functionalist, a mechanistic logic. They prioritize efficiency, structure, and control. They assume systems are neutral and end users are interchangeable. So in the post-Fallist context, where we are rethinking curriculum to be more inclusive, decolonial, and socially responsive, this approach, I believe falls short. So for instance, as you can see, these types of diagrams, they can't tell us what it feels like to use a system, how it may exclude or marginalize certain users, or how it intersects with real-world inequalities. So the intervention I'll share today sought to challenge that. It asked, what might a pedagogy of empathy look like in a classroom? So let's pause briefly on this slide, which many of you may recognize. These are the core principles of design thinking. You see the empathy, complex problem solving, ideation, prototyping, testing, collaboration, user-centeredness, and an iterative process. So in this intervention, I deliberately began with empathy, not as a soft skill, but as a critical lens to reframe the entire problem space. Rather than jumping straight into ideation or technical prototyping, students had to first engage with the lived experiences of the people they were designing for. So what made this approach distinctive was not just the use of UX tools, but the commitment to embedding human-centered design principles in a computing context that often values efficiency over user experience and structure over user stories. So these 8 principles became a reflective anchor throughout the project, reminding students that design is never just technical, it is social, cultural, emotional, and always relational. So students were asked to design a UX map based on a real world social issue aligned with one of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So you can see some chose topics like youth unemployment and health access. Others explored topics like financial, gender exclusion. Others went as far as choosing climate change. So these artifacts push students beyond conventional system specifications for traditional business applications. Like we tend to focus or get students to focus on projects like order management or procurement systems. But here they had to go beyond that and to understand user stories, emotions, pain points, and motivations. So that's where you see these UX tools rooted in empathy. That's where they come from. They don't replace those traditional tools I touched on, but they extend them. They allow students to engage with users' emotions, narratives, pain points, and social context. Things like systems analysis and design tools just can't map at the moment. So as part of the intervention, students use 3 key UX tools that you see here: personas, customer journey maps, empathy maps. So personas are fictional, but research-informed profiles that represent key user types, capturing their goals, frustrations, and behaviors. Customer journey maps, as you may be able to see here, are visual timelines that track a user's interactions with a system or service over time, highlighting pain points, emotions, and opportunities. Empathy maps are tools that help students step into the user's shoes by asking, what does this person think, feel, say, and do? So together, these tools push students to move beyond surface level functionality and consider the emotional and relational dimensions of design. So this brings me to the actual study. We set out to answer 2 core questions. How do students from diverse backgrounds conceive and experience the learning process of UX mapping tools within a design thinking framework? And how can educational interventions be improved to align students' evolving conceptualizations of user experience, or what we call UX? So to explore these questions, we used a research method that's particularly well suited for this kind of inquiry, phenomenography, a phenomenographical approach. Now, for those familiar with the term, it was developed in the 1970s by Ferenc Martin and his colleagues at the University of Gothenburg in Sweden. So Martin was interested in understanding how students learn, and more specifically in identifying the qualitative differences in how they understand the same content. So Martin's work emerged from studies on reading, comprehension, and the distinction between deep and surface learning. It's used primarily in the educational context to explore qualitatively different ways people experience, understand, or conceptualize a phenomenon. So it's not about measuring how well someone knows a concept, but how uncovering the range of meanings. About uncovering the range of meanings that people attach to the concept. So instead of asking, do students understand personas? We ask, what are the different ways students understand and experience personas? What does that tell us about how they learn and how we teach? So this shift is subtle, but I think very powerful. It moves us away from this binary of right or wrong and into a space that values variation in the way students are thinking. So it's also useful in complex or messy learning environments, such as teaching user experience design, where students bring diverse prior knowledge, cultural frames, and learning styles. It gives us what's called an outcome space, a structured representation of different conceptions that emerge among learners. These conceptions are not hierarchical in a kind of moral sense, but they often range from surface level understanding to deeper, more integrated views. So what makes a phenomenographic approach particularly suited for inclusive education is that it, as a start, it recognizes diversity, right? And doesn't view diversity as some kind of problem. It emphasizes the learner's perspective and experience rather than the educator's intention. And it helps educators adapt teaching by aligning with how students actually see and interpret the material. So it is in this way that it supports what we might call a pedagogy of empathy, not just in content, but in how we design learning itself. So phenomenographic, this approach respects the fact that learning is not uniform. It's a spectrum of conceptions, as you can see here. That's what makes it ideal for inclusive education research. So in doing this, you got to take on both the role of educator, you be and a researcher. So it's a kind of a dual role situation. As researcher and educator, and allowed me to observe the student learning firsthand and using those insights for academic research as well. So, but also to directly inform and refine my own teaching practice. So it's an approach grounded in reflective pedagogy, where the classroom becomes both a learning space and a research site, something which I try to promote at our school. So let's talk briefly about my method of analysis. I conducted analysis of students' qualitative feedback. I applied thematic and content analysis to identify recurring patterns in how students conceptualize the UX mapping process. Through this, we distilled 4 distinct student conceptions, what phenomenographic researchers call an outcome space. So here you see the 4 conceptions I found: practical utility, which refers to students who valued UX tools as helpful and applicable in real-world projects. User-centeredness, those who embraced empathy and the idea of designing for real human needs. Adjustment, students who struggled at first but eventually adapted and gained confidence. Skepticism, a small group who remained unconvinced or confused about the relevance of the tools. So let's take a closer look. So the majority of students fell, and it's kind of no surprise for us who teach in this discipline, the majority of students fell into what we'd call the practical utility category. They appreciated how personas and empathy maps helped them to make better design decisions. Here's one student stating, once they genuinely understood the concept of each tool, it became clear how useful they were in connecting user needs to user interface design. This group often expressed a desire to continue using these tools in future projects. Okay, let's move on to the second group. So the second most important conception was user-centeredness. These students spoke about stepping into the user's shoes, developing empathy, and designing with care. One student put it this way: the tools helped me think less about features and more about what the user is really feeling. So this conception reflects a deeper emotional engagement and a meaningful internalizations of the UX principles. So then we have the adjustment group. They described initial confusion or frustration. So student 9 said, it was difficult to get started, but once I understood the topic, it got easier. So some of these students, they credited the course notes and templates as essential support structures that helped them overcome some of the early difficulties. And finally, we had a small group of students express skepticism. One student wrote, I don't see how these diagrams really help. I've never seen them used in the real world. So this response, while rare in this particular class, is important. It reminds us that exposure alone is not enough. We must also create relevance. So yeah, I created a simple representation of these conceptions. Of course, in reality, many students hold more than one perspective. Some could shift from skepticism to adjustment, or from practical utility to deeper user-centeredness. And I think that's the core insight of this research approach, that students exist on a continuum of understanding. So I think, we can support inclusive student-centered pedagogy using this kind of approach. Instead of assuming what students understand, we listen to how they understand and adjust accordingly. I think this is not just a model for user experience education or IS education or for computing education. I think, and I hope it can also contribute to education more generally. So yeah, I'm not claiming to have done anything revolutionary, but it does suggest that even with existing structures, and even in teaching technology or computing, we can listen more closely, we can teach more relationally, and design more justly. So I think we can create a space using these type of approaches for more inclusive, adaptive, and ultimately more impactful education. So to conclude, empathy in design is not just a technical skill or a creative add-on. It's relational, ethical commitment in a decolonial context. It echoes the spirit of Ubuntu. And the words of Archbishop Tutu, I am human, therefore I belong, I participate, I share. So Ubuntu reminds us that our humanity is interconnected, and so too must be our technologies. Empathy then becomes a pathway to designing with care, with context, with a deep respect for the lived realities of others. So in reimagining computing education through a post-Fallist decolonial lens, I think empathy can help us build systems and learning spaces that are not only functional, but just, inclusive and fundamentally human. So I'd like to take any questions or hear your thoughts on this idea of pedagogy of empathy and how it might apply to your own teaching context. Thank you for your time, colleagues. Chair, over to you.
Thank you so much, Professor, for a very interesting intake or approach. Like, to be honest with you, I think this is I don't know if I may call you a genius, but I think the way you planned this and the way you are advocating for Ubuntu when we design certain stuff, I think it's also a takeaway on my side, because I deal with online course design and helping people with technology. So I think I'll start to also incorporate that. I'll design with empathy, meaning that it also comes back to the cause of protest, whatever students go through. As the SRC president also explained, all the challenges that students go through. So I think it's quite I think it's a genius presentation, Professor. And if we could, I'd say let's give you a standing innovation, because in a country full of unrest and political problems and no service delivery, I think this is the way to go in terms of thinking. It can be applied in almost any field. And I'd like to also take questions from the audience. I'm not seeing any questions from the chat. Do you have any questions from the Padlet and Natasha?
I don't have any questions from the Padlet. There are some comments there. Fatima's got her hand raised. I'm sure she's got a question.
Okay, you can go ahead,
Yeah.
Fatima. Thank you.
If there aren't any other questions, because we're the hosting team, okay. Rennie, this is excellent, and I just wanted to ask. I read your article in the conversation where you worked with the Westbury community, and I was quite intrigued by that because it's a suburb just down the road from us. Host of issues there, service. In fact, right now there's been tear gas canisters going off into Rahima Musa Hospital. But I believe you designed a smart city approach there. You've been working with that. I'm curious. Would you have applied the same kind of approach there? I'd imagine so. This design thinking approach with the community, because if so, it really just is an amazing exemplar of how we work from our learning and teaching approaches, and now with community engagement. Then kudos to you. Sorry, I'm preempting that though.
Yeah, no, Fatima, you know, that's, you kind of got to live what you teach, right? So exactly, I mean, so if you truly believe in the value of a concept like empathy and inclusion, then you gotta kind of you know, use those kind of frameworks and models in teaching, but also, as you mentioned, in your community engagement work. So there we used a particular technique called design ethnography, and it's a participatory approach to building smart cities. So my colleague Terence and I were challenging, you know, this kind of top-down bureaucratic approach of building these type of interventions. So we want the community to have a voice in how their communities are going to be designed. It seems like, you know, just common sense to us, right, in a democracy, but obviously those things, as academics, as scholars, we have to remind some of the stakeholders of what their responsibilities are. So yeah, so no, I mean, I try to live the kinds of you know, the theories that I buy into and teach, and try to bring it into the work that we do. And even when I work in industry with the corporates, is to bring that other kind of angle, the angle of empathy, the angle of care, and that type of stuff, which they actually are quite, you'd be surprised, they find it useful.
And Rennie, sort of the time factor associated with these approaches?
A design ethnography approach in terms of doing field work and stuff. Terence's project took about 2 or 3 years. You know, you have to involve. It's quite intensive. But there's no
the curriculum.
Oh, in terms of the curriculum, this is pretty quick to do, right? I mean, very quick. I mean, every time I get a new course handed over to me, I'm always thinking of inclusion. I'm thinking of principles like democracy in design. And so once you've got a lens, I think you can then design your curriculum to adapt to that. So, and you know, like you start off thinking, well, what is post-colonialism? What does it mean to be decolonial? And then you're gonna kind of have to figure out for yourself, and then latch onto some concepts, and you experiment with. So this is just the beginning for me. I thought, let's try a concept like empathy. We all talk about it, but I'm not sure we, you know, we kind of practice what we preach. So let's give it a shot. And yeah, that's what led to this. Thanks. And Sandita, you are much too generous, by the way. I rely on a lot of other scholars to come up with these ideas.
Okay. So I think I also have a question, Professor. So I'm just wondering, because I'm guessing that empathy goes hand in hand with someone who's like disadvantaged or who's in a disadvantaged background. I would like to know, how do you measure empathy of students that come from almost a perfect environment? So meaning that they have less problems to solve. And when they come with the projects, let's say now you have to mark, because I'm bringing this, I think around Fees Must Fall, I once had a conversation with one of the students and I was like, wouldn't you like to run for SRC? And they were like, I wouldn't know which problems to fight for, because now I don't experience any difficulties that maybe certain students experience, because if I were to fight, I'd fight for a two-ply tissue, right? And of course, the university would laugh at that because it's not a student concern or a problem.
Yeah, I think that's where you gotta give students more voice in the classroom, and then what happens is students from different backgrounds get to hear what their peers are experiencing in their worlds, and that's also right, by giving students a voice in the classroom. That's also how you generate an atmosphere that can create more empathy. But if you're the kind of lecturer that's not very engaging, and actually this kind of talk is a bit weird for me. In my lectures, it's a good indication of that I'm doing well is students are speaking more than I am. So I think that's one way that we share stories, and then people can understand what others are going through. And then also, a little thing that I did on this particular initiative, typically we ask our students to go and help a business, as I mentioned, go and build some order management system or some procurement system. And I said, hey, here we have the United Nations, and they have the UN, I forget the name now, the challenges that the UN is, like things like poverty eradication and that type of thing that we've got to address. And then that's another way where you kind of shift the students' paradigm, because they come in there thinking they're going to build an application for helping a corporation, and then they get told that they have to build a system that's going to help a community. So these are some of the techniques you can use. But giving voice to students, that's one way to create an atmosphere where there's more empathy.
Thank you so much, Professor. I think you have answered my question. I see that we have, is it a comment? But it says sustainable development goals are closely aligned with this approach. Would you like to have a...
Yeah, I think that was the word that escaped my mind, SDGs. I can't believe that I forgot that, but making students aware of sustainable development goals and pulls them out of their community, in a sense, isn't it? So if you come from a nice plush middle class or upper middle class background or an elitist background, and then you get told, well, yeah, the sustainable development goals that we got to focus on, and things like poverty eradication and things like climate change, then you create an environment where people get exposure to, they're made more aware of global challenges, and that's how you create empathy, I guess.
Thank you so much, Professor. I think I'm seeing one more hand, and the time is exactly 16:10. So you can go ahead, Fatima.
It's fine. Okay, well, just a little comment, Rennie. I'm just thinking, I don't know if you listened to our AI research seminar earlier on, the roundtable, and we discussed possibly a more amenable way of approaching the AIs would be developing our own tools using participatory co-design. And I'm just thinking about your smart design, smart cities, whereby there was a concern about surveillance in that, and that the communities own that. So that could be a similar principle we'd follow here in terms of data sovereignty. I'm just thinking that that approach would be applicable to the university's design of in-house AI tools, possibly.
Yeah, that's so true. I've also been using popular media to promote the idea that we've got to, as a country and as a continent, focus on things like digital sovereignty, AI sovereignty, once you understand the kind of details of how these technologies are being built, you know that they're inherently biased, and that's why I made the point that we must not assume that technologies are neutral, right?
Mm-hmm.
An AI algorithm designed with Western data applied to the African context, and you're going to have problems. So I think we've got to do more work on those type of things, and I'm glad on your side there's awareness of these type of challenges as well. Yeah, so this extends to a lot of the things, a lot of the kind of trends we're seeing right now. I mean, even things like climate change and these data the big servers that we have got to keep cool, and the amount of water they use, and so every time we use ChatGPT, for example, the implications for climate is something we hardly think about. So, but yeah. Lots to think about, lots to do.
Thanks, Rennie.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Awesome.
If there are no further questions, I think we can close. But on the final note, I think maybe Fatima, it would be great to invite Professor again, maybe to come and present. I think a lot of colleagues would have loved to hear this interesting concept of empathy, and also maybe adopting it so that we also start using it within the center. Thank you so much, Professor. It was great having you, and thank you to everyone that attended.
Thanks, colleagues.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thanks.